Hello everybody and welcome back. It honestly feels like ages since the last time we've taken a look at this. We took a hell of a long break, the 2 months that I spent on the Zelda video, and now we're back to Medal of Honor, trying to get this thing finished up with our first look at Airborne. Now, Airborne is an interesting case because for what you would usually think of Electronic Arts, they're trend following, no creativity, tails between your legs sort of person, trying to get ahead by following behind. But honestly, Medal of Honor had a slight creative integrity before it completely fell apart in 2013 or whatever the heck the last, I suppose, major release went out for the 360. I know that they put out that VR game, but I mean, it's a VR game, so it's just basically a cameo appearance to me. I'm not going to be covering it. But Airborne was released probably around the 2007 line cut between World War II and Modern Warfare. So, it's pretty interesting that they're still putting out a World War II game. Not interesting enough for anyone to really know about this game at all, and we'll definitely get into why that's the case, because I have reviewed everything that the game has to offer, and we are going to figure that out pretty damn quickly, as you could imagine by what we're going to be talking about in the future. Now, Airborne, as you could imagine, is pretty much the premise of the whole game. The major premise is that it's a World War II game. It's just another one. So, if you're out here for a story and wondering why Airborne completely failed to imprint on anybody's memory, that's pretty much what it was. This is like the 13th just a World War II game that they've put out for this series. And story in first-person shooters is really the only way that you're going to be able to stand out, because FPS shooting at this point is pretty much a solved game, and if you're not going to put in the big effort to really differentiate yourself with the combat, then you're basically just going to fall into the pit that the genre became around the end of the 2000s, blending into the 2010s. The whole premise is that we are an airborne assault team. And this is between the Italy campaign all the way to, I don't know how close they get to Berlin. They don't really go into Berlin. They basically stop at a really big set-piece stronghold, and then that's the game. Like, smash cut to the credits sort of end. And that's another reason why the story sucks, is because they didn't spend any time with any characters, smelling the roses, any set pieces. And honestly, most of what the cutscenes got in this game is pretty much the bargain standard, describing the mission in very vague terms, just throwing out some military bullshit terms, slotting them into typical sentences, and then they have the bog standard boilerplate snappy dialogue between the quote-unquote characters as they contemplate their mission. They wonder if they're gonna get shot, they pull up some bravado, but again, we have no characters, we have no narrative, we have no story, we have no major plot points, so who gives a shit? No one's gonna remember this, so I don't even know why I brought it up. However, Airborne is definitely not the shittiest game ever. There's definitely some good points. The first one is that they did consolidate their quality on one particular thing, and that is the environment. This game has pretty good environments. This is around the PS3 and 360 era. I think it's about the beginning to the middle of it. I think this is around 2009, 2008. Like I said, right around Modern Warfare, and honestly, the jump to the 7th gen did this game a hell of a lot of favors. Like, they definitely spent the time getting this thing up to spec. And while the environments themselves are, again, typical bog standard boilerplate things that we've seen 7 times before in this franchise, they did them really, really well. Like, just the details on the backdrops, the buildings you're going into, the lay of the land that you're flying around. The maps are actually pretty big, which is definitely going to be something they should have done for the big thing that we're going to be talking about later, again. But I really do appreciate that they really put in the effort to show where the buildings were bombed out, the things on fire, the grassland that you have to go around, and especially the really big building set pieces. Especially the one thing that this game would ever be known for, which is the final level, which is this insanely ridiculous and completely fantastical iron fortress tower thing that apparently Germany built in this fictional world. It's completely ridiculous. Like, this thing is 20 feet tall. It is like an entire Empire State Building's worth of space. It is absolutely covered in flak guns. It's covered in artillery. Like, this thing is just like the most ridiculous castle World War II thing that anyone could have dreamed of. And honestly, I kind of love it for that. Like, it is so completely absurd that it's just so blatantly would never happen. But Germany apparently had it around 1944. In the real world, they were trying to make like that super cannon to like shoot missiles at London, and they couldn't fucking make it work. I don't know if it was called like Big Bertha or something. Like, if people know their World War II stuff, I might put a link in the description about them. There was like this gun, this cannon that they were trying to build that was like a half a mile long, and they had to build it underground for the obvious reason, because it obviously couldn't support itself being that long. And the problem with that gun was because it was so big, it was insanely obvious to the enemy, so they bombed the shit out of it before it ever got completed. How the fuck would this thing be standing? This thing is like 3 times taller than any building surrounding it for miles. Like, this thing is going to be made out of concrete and rebar. That shit is not going to survive a concentrated bombing effort, which would be happening in 44 or 45, I don't know. Is at the end of the war, we're invading into Germany. It's not only absurd that it was designed like that, it's absurd that it exists at the time that it does. Like, we are at the time where we are airdropping in soldiers into Germany in World War II. Like, come on. I spend so much time on this one thing because honestly, this giant tower thing is not only the most interesting level in the game, it also takes up about a quarter of the game. So, yeah, you work around the entire top of it, you try to invade into it, and there's just enemies everywhere. Like, it's consistently concentrated just across the board, and then we're going, like, deep down into the guts of this damn thing, like down the freight elevators to try and find the nondescript leaders of the Nazi battalion that happen to be stationing this thing. And we are just like trying to sabotage the shit out of it, kill everyone inside of it, because this thing is a huge threat to anything around it for like, I don't know, 25 miles. Like, this thing is ridiculously huge. Nobody is going to be able to stand up to this thing wrecking the shit. So, yeah, just basically just bombing the entire tower and collapsing it from inside out. Because apparently in the fictional world, there's no other way that they could have destroyed this thing. In the real world, they could probably torpedo the shit out of it eventually. A giant concrete structure is not going to survive aerial bombing at the end of the war. I know that you try to keep things like historically accurate as much as you can, and you definitely do that in the guns. And in the guns, like, the shooting is perfectly fine, it's accurate, it's meaty, it's exactly what you want it to be. You kind of got limited guns because they always go back to the standards, they always go back to the shotgun, the machine gun, the rifle, you know, the typical MP5s and whatever the hell the rifle is called. Like, the shooting is so standardized that I don't even want to comment on it at this point in any FPS review, because you know exactly what the shooting is, how it works. There's no point in describing it. The one thing that this game has in the gameplay is that it does have optional objectives that apparently gives you, like, weapon upgrades for the mission you're in. Like, I remember at one point, I did an objective and I got, like, a 64 bullet mag upgrade for doing that, so the maps are pretty big, and I'd imagine they have side objectives for you to do, again, alluding to the thing in the future. But speaking about the gameplay, if you do pick up Airborne for whatever reason, if this actually looks interesting to you, and honestly, it looks interesting, because again, it's very pretty, the engine is definitely working overtime, it's pretty high-spec graphics, it's really pretty to look at. They're good shooting galleries. They're big, they're explorative, they got tons of cover, like, it's on the higher end of what you would expect. But on the flip side of that, Airborne is weirdly a difficult game. While I was watching my run-through of this, I was dying pretty consistently. I was going down, like, a lot more than I thought I would. And again, a weird, like, holdover from the Modern Warfare split of the genre, this game is a health bar shooter, which is interesting that they're still doing that in 2008 and shows that they were either slow to the party or they had some sort of integrity to what Medal of Honor was doing. Because Medal of Honor at the beginning had a bit of an edge in trying to honor the past. It wasn't the primary reason why Medal of Honor was made, but they always had that idea. Like, they brought on some authenticity. I remember in the beginning, I think they did have a couple of actual military advisors helping them out in the original PSX days. But it's a hard game. Like, it's not impossible, obviously. Like, 1,000 monkeys, 1,000 typewriters, you're gonna get through it, but it's hard. Like, you're gonna go down quite a bit, and I think that's because of how the layout of the maps is designed. Like, I also remember a bunch of like tight corridors built in such a way where AI has these long shots. They can get down into some sort of sniper pits, they can get down to good cover and just shoot you, and you can't really figure out, and you don't have a good way to counter it, because while they're shooting you, you have to figure out where they are, and while you're doing that, you're being turned into Swiss cheese, so it's not the best idea. And checkpointing isn't super good. Like, you're gonna checkpoint like at the beginning of a shooting gallery, not in the middle of it, which can kind of be irritating because, again, the enemies respawn, it becomes a problem, and then it just turns into this cycle of eventually inching your way forward to victory. I remember there was a mission on a bridge to get an armored carrier or a tank through the blockade to either blow up the bridge or just get across, and that was a really harsh corridor mission. I'm imagining I'm showing it on screen right now. This is what I'm talking about. Like, it's very easy to die in this game. The time to death for you is kind of higher than standard. Enemies are harder to find. They probably don't have like so much more health. And like I said, there's a higher death count in this game if you do go for it. And I believe the only reason why the death count is so high is because Airborne, at the end of the day, is an absurdly short game. Even with the amplified death count that I was talking about, the game was done in under 4.5 hours. They padded this thing to shit. Just stuffed it in, perfectly designed it to try and get as much out of the limited stock of things they had available for you to do. I don't know why EA made this. I don't know if like building the maps to this detail just ate up so much time or whatever, but it's an embarrassingly short game. It's got no story, the gameplay is just stock standard. This is just another World War II game with nothing special about it other than that big castle. There's nothing else to talk about. It looks good, but you'll forget about it immediately, which is what I did. And then I made this very vague video about it. I don't recommend Airborne because, like I said, there is really no point in playing it. It's only 4 hours long. You can get shooting in a better game somewhere else that actually feels meaningful and satisfying. This really just feels like a literal time sink. Like, the only reason you would play this is you have an afternoon free and you need something to do. You just like the shooty bang bang and you don't really care what's happening because honestly EA didn't really care in putting out this iteration. The idea of Airborne combat things could have gone somewhere, but literally the only difference, the only meaningful difference in what Airborne does versus any other FPS is that at the beginning of every mission you're going to get parachuted in. Which isn't much of a difference because in other FPSs, especially World War II ones, you'll get parachuted into missions probably once or twice in the game itself. You don't need... It's such a meaningless difference that I'm surprised they fucking subtitled the game about that. But then again, considering the game that we're talking about, I guess that's literally the best thing they could have subtitled it with, because there's nothing else about this game that is memorable, that is worth reviewing about it, to be honest. We're just doing this for completion's sake. We're halfway through the series already, so we're going back to game-specific videos. I'm glad to be back. I wish I had a better subject to talk about. It's just a good, okay FPS. It's a return to form, and I guess the best thing about it is that it does show that EA possibly, probably not, had some creative integrity to stick with World War II. Maybe they were just betting on it winning out in the end. Except that Modern Warfare at the time was interesting, it was new, Call of Duty 4 was providing a really remarkably good and differentiated and varied shooter. It was everything that Airborne isn't. So if EA was banking on World War II winning out in the end, I don't know why the fuck they put, like, the base amount of effort in and didn't do anything else with it. Like, the original game is more interesting than this. That's how far you could tell that they screwed up. So yeah, glad to be back. We're gonna be producing this video. It should be out in a week. And like I always do, I will wish you all out there a victory for gamers, and I hope you all have a good night. Don't play Airborne.